chosen few.
Quincy Adams says,
If my dad was president, I should get to be president too.
Good evening and welcome to the CUNY Academy for this installment of AP US History, where we're not just learning history, we're making history. All right, so today we're going to talk about the Nullification Crisis, one of the more misunderstood events of the Andrew Jackson administration. So this is in response to something called the Tariff of Abominations. All right, you might recognize the word abominations from like abominable snowman, so something like big and bad and evil. All right, so in 1816, Congress creates a tariff. This is to finance the American system from Henry Clay, to finance most of the internal improvements and things that are mostly going to benefit the North. All right, and it gets increased in 1828 and 1824. Unlike the Congresses of today, they had no problem raising taxes during election year. But this makes the South very angry, especially this guy here named John C. Calhoun, who was a South Carolina senator, one of the war hawks, and then vice president under Andrew Jackson. All right. What it does is it raises the price of cheap cloth, which had been imported from England, but now that England has to import that cloth, they are paying a tariff that is a tax on imports. It's going to make that go up. All right. And then the cotton exports are going to go up as well. There's no tax on exports, as we know from the Constitution, but England, in retaliation, is going to raise the price or the tariff on cotton in their country, which is going to hurt the southern farmers as well. So Calhoun, all right, as the vice president, calls this tariff of abominations because it's disgusting and loathsome and hurtful to the southern economy. All right, and he argues that this is not within the scope of the government to use a tariff to regulate trade. All right, that a tariff is supposed to raise revenue, but Congress is calling it a protective tariff because it is going to protect the northern industries from the competition from England, making English goods cost more and goods made domestically at home cost less. All right, so that's where Calhoun's primary objection comes into this. All right, now he's also a descendant of Jefferson and Madison, and follow this doctrine or idea of nullification. All right, that's why it's called the Nullification Crisis. All right, moving along. All right, Calhoun devises this theory where if federal laws are objectionable to the states have a right to nullify the law. We saw this with the Alien and Sedition Acts, nullified through the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. His argument is that the states created the Constitution. There was no Constitution here before when the states were created, so since the states created it, they also had a right to declare it unjust. All right, so they're going to say, we're not going to follow this law. So essentially, South Carolina is not going to collect the tariff. Why is that bad? Because obviously England would do all their importing through South Carolina, not having to pay that. So when Calhoun does this nullification threat, he's also going to threaten to secede from the Union. All right, we're going to see that happen about 30 years later in the Civil War. But when he threatens to secede, Congress passes a new tariff, but South Carolina says that's still unacceptable because it is still protective, and that's still going to be harmful to their businesses, and England is going to hurt them with the cost of cotton increasing as well. So this creates kind of a showdown here in Jackson's near the end of his first presidency. So South Carolina declares the tariff null and void, saying that if the federal government collects the tariff, they are going to secede and break away. Now, we do know South Carolina is the first state to secede and break away in 1860. Now, why do they do that and have success? Because other states join in, all right? Other states follow suit. In this case, South Carolina is all by itself in their threat to secede, so they don't have the necessary support to make that work. So Jackson threatens to come and hang the nullifiers. That was his exact quote. All right, Jackson was going to hang the nullifiers and got Congress to pass a force bill, which essentially gives Jackson, as commander-in-chief, the power to use federal troops to go into South Carolina and forcefully collect the tariff. Okay, so this enters Henry Clay, the great compromiser, who works out a deal that the tariff will be gradually lowered to basically a point where it's just necessary to generate enough revenue for the federal government. It's not protective. It's not trying to hurt the English businesses or anything, but it's just there to raise revenue. And in response, South Carolina will not secede and not threaten to leave the Union. All right, so we see Jackson, the forceful president, we see Clay, the great compromiser, and we see Calhoun authoring this doctrine of nullification, which is actually, he pens anonymously. As VP, you don't want to come out openly and threaten to secede from the Union that you're the vice president of. So that creates a little bit of a controversy along the way. All right. Now, how does this reflect on Jackson? We're having a debate tomorrow, and many students do not bring this topic into the debate of the nullification crisis, guessing because they don't understand it or maybe they don't see how it fits. All right, those of you arguing that Jackson is democratic could make the point that Jackson is enforcing a law of Congress, and Congress is reflective of the federal government, that they are going to respond to the will of the people. The people wanted this tariff, and Jackson is representing that and preventing South Carolina from doing that. Those of you arguing that he's more like a tyrant, here's a president using force, using the military, right, like kings often would, to force a state into submission, force them to support a policy that they don't agree with, taking away South Carolina's right to be democratic and representative of the people and not follow the tariff. So this can fit on either side. It's a question of how you back it up with evidence from the writings of Calhoun and Jackson. All right, for that one. All right, so this kind of concludes our nullification lesson. One last funny story about all this is this force bill, which gives Jackson and the Federal Army the force to come down and collect the tariff in South Carolina. Once that's passed and Clay averts the controversy and lowers the tariffs and gets South Carolina to withdraw their threat to secede, South Carolina responds by nullifying the force bill. So it kind of had to have the last word on this particular crisis. All right, so a little humor there to end the story here. All right, so that concludes our lesson here in the Kuhn Academy. So thanks for listening. Remember, we're not just learning history, we're making history. And the song, for those of you wondering, is called The Corrupt Bargain, which is how Jackson came to play into the presidency, or eventually comes into the presidency, by a group called Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson. Here we go.
Henry Clay says,
I'll make you president if you make me Secretary of State.
Alexis de Tocqueville says,